Students have been asking me, how do you take notes in this class? All right, so if this is your notebook, here's the way I'm going to answer the question. And this is a method that I learned when I was in college and what I used. Yes, I used paper. So I guess you could do the same if you're using any sort of electronic device. But pretty much what I did was I only used the right side of the notebook for notes in class. And then as the professor, changed topics, I just kind of gave them a new heading. So if we were looking at like World War One, here the professor was talking about causes. Once they stopped talking about causes, and let's say over here they started talking about something else. I don't know what soldiers went through. I would give this the heading, soldiers, and then I would kind of write down the information. It's tough because you probably want to try to jot down any sort of term that's mentioned, like a policy or an act. I guess this is going to vary. Sometimes it might be like a story or a summary. You want to try to avoid writing down every little detail, especially if it's in a lecture where you're in person. If you have a video or something like that, then you always have the chance to kind of fill that stuff up with information. Um, Now, on the left side, what you want to do is, if you have a book, an online source, or a film, something else, even just a simple Google search, you want to do that Google search, and you want to then put that new information here, which should be the same as A. So A, if we were talking about causes of World War One, I now did a search for causes of World War One online, or maybe I read about it in a book. So then what you're doing here is you're taking two sources, and then you can use like this side to maybe mesh the two together. Say, okay, he said this, and then in a documentary or online they said this. Here is the way I am processing the information. This is your synthesis. This is your processing of the information. You've taken source one, source two, and then you've added both up and you have come up with your own unique source. I know you're probably thinking, well, there is an assessment we need to study, and I get that. I'm going to address all three classes that I teach, the 9/11 class, race, class, gender, and US, because I think it will help. In the 9/11 class, you want to be careful trying to write down everything because I'm primarily concerned with things that lead up to 9/11. So let's take this particular day here. This slideshow is on the Crusades. The Crusades could be a class within itself. So, maybe I handed this timeline out or I referenced it. You notice how they're saying, I got a bunch of names and things there that maybe you're not too familiar with. And I could see, you're trying to write down every little detail of the Crusades. At the end of the day, what I'm really concerned about in this particular class is understanding how the Crusades will be used later, which when we go back to this particular piece here, I do think we reference, some of the Al-Qaeda ideology and how they're accessing history here. So I'm pretty good in this class with saying, okay, this is the way it's going to be used on a test. And that's really when you want to start putting down like some information, maybe have another section that just says, he said here, this is going to be on the test, something like that. But again, like in all of my classes, I always have a section of test review guides. So what I would say is this, maybe in your notes, you wrote down a whole bunch of stuff here about the Crusades, who's involved, who's dying, how many people. And at the end of the day, I really wasn't too concerned about those specifics. How do we know? Well, you can access my test review. I wrote a summary here, and you could simply look at the test review guide. And I would say whatever is not mentioned here, disregard. So like, when we talk about Jahili Society, maybe you want to go back into your notes, and if you wrote down Jahili Society, you could say, okay, well, what did he say here, and what is he saying in the review? Just so you know, in class, I always write on the board using these headlines, and I always, change. So like if we were in class on the board for B, I would put down causes of World War One, or maybe I said it was A before, and then I would shift, the soldier's experience. You would actually see these headings, and I would make sure in class that if I'm going to put anything on the board, whether it's an image, a term, policy, or something, I'm going to put it under the correct, heading. So you want to make sure you're doing that, being conscious of those particular items. So like in the 9/11 class, let's go back there. We had this one class where we looked at a bunch of terrorist attacks. And again, in class, I'm usually pretty good saying, well, this is how it's going to be used on the test. So for this one, there are a lot of slides, and the main focus here is just, what are examples of terrorist attacks, and how does that kind of relate? So there's a lot of slides that are kind of getting to that particular point. Um, but you don't have to jot down every item. So here we see some terrorist attacks by some of these particular groups. And notice how I've made connections by using other examples right here. So here I'm trying to connect, Malcolm X, some of the gay rights, response to attacks, Salahadin, and so on. It's not crucial that you're trying to jot down every item. You're just going to have to try to stay focused with whatever the main point is. If you are in the race, class, gender course, I would say in this class, I usually have a slide that reads last class main points. So when you see that slide, that's letting you know these are the things that are definitely important from last class. And then I would just kind of proceed with whatever we were doing in class on this particular day. Then, of course, when we get to day 3, you will probably see a slide that will say something similar. Reading points made last class. There you go. In the US class, this one's a little more challenging because you have to know certain information to, pass common assessments. In race class and in 9/11, you pretty much have a little more flexibility. But in US, you have to know certain points. You have to know 14 points. So their tests are a little more structured, and it's really just looking for, do you know the information or not? So what I would say is if you are in that class, you definitely want to make sure that you're focusing on some of the terms. But keep in mind, all of the screencasts, slideshows, everything that I am putting on the site, it's kind of done in a format where I am trying to communicate some sort of overall central theme. So when we look in that particular class, and I think I try to do this in all of the classes, let's take a look here. Here where it says feed me a story. So here you have the slideshow that's talking about the causes for World War I. And then here is the slideshow for it. And so there's a central point if you were to watch this particular screencast. It's pretty much about the European causes for World War I. So that's what you need to focus on. And if you are still lost, feel free to ask in class, hey, what's the main point? What is on the test? You want to ask those questions, email me, whatever it is you have to do. And if that doesn't, you don't do that, like I said, use the review guides and use that to see what is in your notes. When you're looking at the review guide, if you have no idea what UGSW is or Germany invading Belgium, I probably can direct you to the slideshow or the screencast that pertains to that particular item. Maybe you weren't in class, maybe you were, just zoned out for a minute, maybe you were in the bathroom. Who knows what was going on that particular day? So make sure you're looking at the notes and, using this particular format where you're just, trying to, put down those main points. But keep in mind, I will be, anything that I think is important, I'm going to mention it. I'm going to say, put this in your notes that way, or I'll write it on the board, or, I'll probably go over it a couple of times. So keep that in mind. If there are any questions, feel free, email, ask, whatever. I'm here to help.